I've had a multi-pronged career, David. I started straight out of university as a high school teacher. I was a trained mathematician and economist, so I went and taught that for 6 years, and I taught around the world. So it's that combination of teaching, which is having to simplify things to a difficult audience, particularly when you're teaching a subject like maths, and also working in a multicultural environment. Teaching, I taught in Latin America, I taught in South Asia, I taught in the Middle East. Each of those cultures has a different way of absorbing information, of doing stuff with the information. So unbeknownst to me, I was learning all about behaviours and psychology through my teaching career. But ultimately, I was only a teacher for 6 years. I then moved into the corporate world, and that's where I started to work in the strategy world. Actually, I joined an oil and gas firm, and I used my maths and economics to do strategy and analysis. And it wasn't long before I was headhunted into strategy consulting, where I went in 12 years from analyst to partner. So I kind of did all the consulting, and it really became fascinated with what was strategy. I wrote some big strategies for big companies around the world. And then when I went back to see if they were doing them, 9 times out of 10 they weren't. And that's where I realized that having a great strategy alone, an idea, isn't enough, because in those 90% of times, it was human behaviors that were stopping the strategy from being successful. And I realized from my teaching experience, I was very, very good at fixing that. Get me in a room with people who didn't understand, couldn't agree, couldn't get excited by an idea, and I could fix all that. And that's where the idea of Shigeto was born. You've got to build strategy, not just thinking about the IQ part. You've got to think about how does it feel for the people, but also how focus. Well, actually, the focus bit, the FQ, was the thing that came to me last. When I really dug, I said it's still not just about a great idea and a bunch of people really excited by it. There's got to be something else, and that's when I realised it was about focus as well. IQ, EQ, FQ, and success is very much linked to my own life. Mm-hmm. The FQ in particular is the aspect that is my weakest of the three. I looked back at areas of my life where I'd been super successful versus ones where I haven't. And it was that lack of discipline, lack of focus, lack of prioritization. So I think about the things that went really wrong. So often we learn most from the failure, not the success. But it's when you compare the failures to the successes that you can spot where the areas for development are. And, I just look at my life as a constant experiment, and that's the attitude I approach with my clients. I'll give you the ideas, let's try them out, and if they work, we keep doing them. And if they don't, we'll pick the next idea. So very much, my successes and failures have been the backbone for this methodology and for the successes and failures of the companies that I work with.
Leadership Connected podcast. I am David Dalian Cruz, and I'm so excited you're here today. In this podcast, we dive into what really matters, finding your life's purpose, discovering your why, and learning how to connect life and leadership in a healthy and sustainable way. What fuels your energy and passion? How do we grow and stay as leaders who make a real difference? Here you will find conversations, insights, and inspiration to live with a greater purpose and lead with heart. Want to learn more? Visit lifeleadershipconnected.com. lifeleadershipconnected.com. I'm your guide and coach, David Dalian Cruz. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the podcast Life and Leadership Connected podcast. And today I have the honor to have a guest whose name is Faris Aranki. Faris Aranki. Welcome to the podcast, Faris.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you and the listeners and the viewers here today.
As I usually do, I will give a short presentation of who Faris is. And he's a founder of a company called Shigeto Consulting and the creator of a refreshing, simple yet powerful formula for success. It is like this: success equals IQ times EQ times FQ. And with that stands for at least the later part of that he can explain later. Faris has spent over 20 years at intersection of strategy, emotional intelligence and focus. And doing what? Helping organization and individuals unlock greater clarity and performance. He has worked with clients like Amazon, Anglo American, Reckitt, Mars, Heineken, Fevertree, NHS, Lloyds Banking Group, Carney, Bering & Moore. He is known for making strategic thinking accessible and also for his deep insight into leadership psychology and for his ability to help people cut through noise and distractions so they can lead with clarity and impact. In today's conversation, we will explore what it really takes to succeed in today's fast-paced world and how your emotional intelligence and focus might matter more than raw intellect, and how to grow in all three dimensions. I think that's it, Faris. Is that a good introduction of you, or do you want to add something?
No, that's a brilliant introduction. I think it sets up nicely the conversation we're about to have, David. And so, let's dive in.
Yeah, good. So, Faris, tell us a bit about your story. What led you to create Shiagetto and this unique formula for success?
Yeah, well, I guess Shiagetto was 20 years in the making, so to speak. I've had a multi-pronged career, David. I started straight out of university as a high school teacher. I was a trained mathematician and economist, so I went and taught that for 6 years, and I taught around the world. So it's that combination of teaching, which is having to simplify things to a difficult audience, particularly when you're teaching a subject like maths, and also working in a multicultural environment. I taught in Latin America, I taught in South Asia, I taught in the Middle East. Each of those cultures has a different way of absorbing information, of doing stuff with the information. So unbeknownst to me, I was learning all about behaviors and psychology through my teaching career. But ultimately, I was only a teacher for 6 years. I then moved into the corporate world, and that's where I started to work in the strategy world. Actually, I joined an oil and gas firm, and I used my maths and economics to do strategy and analysis. And it wasn't long before I was headhunted into strategy consulting, where I went in 12 years from analyst to partner. So I kind of did all the consulting, and it really became fascinated with what was strategy. I wrote some big strategies for big companies around the world. And then when I went back to see if they were doing them, 9 times out of 10 they weren't. And that's where I realized that having a great strategy alone, an idea, isn't enough, because in those 90% of times, it was human behaviors that were stopping the strategy from being successful. And I realized from my teaching experience, I was very, very good at fixing that. Get me in a room with people who didn't understand, couldn't agree, couldn't get excited by an idea, and I could fix all that. And that's where the idea of Shiagetto was born. You've got to build strategy, not just thinking about the IQ part. You've got to think about how does it feel for the people, but also how focused. Well, actually, the focus bit, the FQ, was the thing that came to me last. When I really dug, I said it's still not just about a great idea and a bunch of people really excited by it. There's got to be something else. And that's when I realized it was about focus as well.
What personal experience shaped your view of success?
Loads of personal experiences. IQ, EQ, FQ, and success is very much linked to my own life. Mm-hmm. The FQ in particular is the aspect that is my weakest of the three. I looked back at areas of my life where I'd been super successful versus ones where I haven't. And it was that lack of discipline, lack of focus, lack of prioritization. So I think about the things that went really wrong. So often we learn most from the failure, not the success. But it's when you compare the failures to the successes that you can spot where the areas for development are. And, I just look at my life as a constant experiment, and that's the attitude I approach with my clients. I'll give you the ideas, let's try them out, and if they work, we keep doing them. And if they don't, we'll pick the next idea. So very much, my successes and failures have been the backbone for this methodology and for the successes and failures of the companies that I work with.
Yeah, wow. I usually ask 4 questions to everybody in the podcast, and here's the first one I ask.
Okay.
And I wonder, Faris, what gives you life in the work you do today? And how do you keep your energy up and your focus sharp day by day?
Yeah. Do you know what? I get such a joy when, and it's the same joy I got when I was a school teacher, that joy of when you fix something in a team or for an individual that has been holding them back for a while. So back in the day when I was a teacher, it was helping that child who didn't understand maths or didn't understand algebra get it for the first time. And you could see this moment that you think, from now on, things are going to be different for you. And it's the same when I work with a team and we fix something or we change something, and you can just see as the person at the front that things are going to be different now. And that, I get such a buzz from that. That's kind of a rush I want to get more of, so I put myself in more rooms, working with more teams or with more individuals, because it's, I'm not. Yeah, I often say to people, I'm not here to do rocket science. I'm not teaching you something or doing something that you don't already know. But what I am doing is I'm helping you unlock it from yourself that for one reason or another, you're just not doing it.
Yeah.
And that brings me such joy.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. And I wonder, what do most people get wrong about success? Where do they fail, so to speak, and where do they miss the point?
Well, I would say this, but the answer lies in the equation.
Yeah.
We all have a weak one of the three. I say it's like a tripod, and one of the legs is always wobbling. So work out, it's either the IQ, your ideas aren't as good as they could be. And the big problem here in the IQ panel is people just use the same idea over and over. They don't look for new ideas. And that's probably the biggest problem that I find is, and that's okay. Sometimes going back to what you already know is it. But if you need to do new stuff, you need to get new ideas. In the EQ bucket, often the biggest problem that I find is people are not flexing their style enough. They are talking how they like to talk, not how the other person likes to receive. It's very easily done. We write for ourselves, we communicate for ourselves, but actually the best speakers and writers and people with emotional intelligence speak for the other person. Yeah. In the focus bucket, the biggest problem is prioritization, trying to do too many things at the same time. We're all guilty of it. People say I can multitask, people take on too many projects, but every time you do that, you're fundamentally putting at jeopardy the other things you're already doing.
Yeah. Wow. And I wonder, here's another question I ask everybody in the podcast.
Yeah.
Tell me about your leadership of yourself and others, and what key challenges and milestones shaped you to the one person you are today.
Well, I've been lucky enough through the career that I've had to have some great leaders and some not so great leaders, and I think you learn from those an awful lot. They're very similar to the successes and failures that we mentioned before, and they've not always been in the places that I thought they'd be. I probably had some very, very inspirational. If you'd asked me before my career, I would have thought when I moved into industry, I'd meet some amazing people. But actually, a lot of the really influential people came from my teaching days. Watching exhibits leadership skills and don't be fooled. You can be a leader in any environment. You don't need a formal title. But watching some people command a room, get people excited, understand what really was going on for everyone inside their head. For me, those are the most powerful leaders. The ones who were able to speak last, the ones who were able to park their ego. And then when I came into industry, and particularly in some industries, I saw all the negative behaviours that made me think, God, I don't want to be like that. Really, I've tried to take those things, but the missing element is feedback. You can't be a good leader in a vacuum. You can't be a good leader because you say you're a good leader. Yeah. You need to constantly be checking with those you are leading how it is for them. And that has been really sort of powerful for me, and that's why I constantly seek feedback. And even now, even though I'm teaching leadership, I don't ever rest and say I'm the finished item. I always want to know more, because we all can improve, but also we all in different environments operate differently.
Yeah, great. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you develop this IQ times EQ plus FQ formula? A bit about the process. I mean, we understand it from what you said so far, but can you maybe develop that a little bit?
Yeah, as I say, when I was in strategy consulting, we over-indexed on IQ. Go away, and often you'd go away and do it in isolation. Go away, come back and tell us the answer. Yeah. Should we do option A or should we do option B? Go and look at all the economics, go and look at all the regulation and the future trends, and just come back and tell us an answer. So that was very much IQ. And there might be a little bit of EQ when we walk in the room and in the conversations to the build-up. This person doesn't like that technology, so make sure we don't mention that. But it wasn't really getting underneath and saying, how are they going to feel as a team, as a business to this strategy? How much change is it going to involve? How much personal jeopardy is at risk for these people? Is their jobs going to be at risk? Is it going to put them in positions where they're under much more stress? So really getting into that level of thinking about it from the other person's point of view. Largely because the people I worked with were very high IQ. It was their natural place. Well, just present a great idea and people should do it, as though we're all very rational people, the economist's dream. So, this is where it started to percolate that it's not enough, right? And this is when I became fascinated by reading about psychology and the sort of the work of people like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, how people don't make rational decisions when presented with them. And this is, so the more I understood it, the more I'd see it in rooms. I'd say, well, logically they should be picking option A, but they seem to be picking option C. Why is that? And so really that's where the importance of EQ came into. And again, it was stuff I already knew from having observed the kids, but I just never put it in a corporate environment. And that was a big epiphany for me. Right, we really need this is just as important to consider in this arena for these people. So that really was the first evolution, and so that was where I started to apply a different approach to building a strategy or working with clients and companies. And it was about another year down the road where this concept of focus really came in, because I'd been in rooms where people got very excited by a strategy, got very excited by an idea, and I was like, brilliant, now this should be successful. But what you're doing at that moment is assuming they're in a vacuum and that all the rest of their life is kept out of it and they're only solo focusing on that idea. But as soon as obviously those senior people leave a meeting, they're into the next senior meeting, about another important topic. Okay, and you've got to hope that your issue is the most important on their mind, but often it's not. Right, and that's where I started to go, well, hang on, unless we're beginning to consider this, which, at the time I didn't call focus, I was like, it's got to be so important for them that they're willing to turn down other things. And again, the clues were obvious. If you look at the most successful people and think, they are mono-focused. They don't take on. I've met some amazing people who literally have one goal and build their life around it. It's what makes Olympians Olympians. It's what makes explorers explorers. Now, I'm not saying people need to do that in business, that level of rigor, but they need to say no to a lot more things and be more focused. And that's where we introduced the concept of focus quotient. And it allowed us to talk about the things that weren't happening in the room. To say, well, hang on a minute, what else is going on in your world? Are you actually going to give this the attention it needs?
Wow, thank you. But when you meet a person with a weakness, how do you train them? How do you help them to grow their weakest quotient? Without, feeling ashamed or overwhelmed and so on?
Well, and shame and emotion is a big thing, right? Because here's the thing, we all have a weakest one. It's just, it's a comparative. You could have two of them at 100 and one of them at 99, and that will be your weakest one. So it's fine to call it, or the one you just need to work on the most. And what's really interesting is people often don't know. I regularly go into a room, explain the concept of IQ, EQ, FQ, and get people to just raise their hands. I said, who here thinks IQ is the one they need to work on most? Who here needs EQ? Who needs FQ? And the same thing generally happens, whichever room in whichever country I'm in. People will raise their hands at FQ. Okay, they'll say, I need help with my focus. And I worked out why. It's because they feel that's the safest one to admit in a public arena. Yeah, they don't want to admit, I'm not as clever as I could be, because that's how they see IQ. They don't want to admit, I'm not as good with people as I could be. That's EQ. But they do say, oh, I'm happy to admit that I sometimes get distracted by my phone, or I sometimes could, But actually, when I did an audit of all the work that I've helped with people, it is generally EQ where we help the most as a company. And that's what made me think that people don't know or willing to admit which is their weakest. So first bit is getting them to accept where they could improve. And the reality is we can improve in all of them. So sometimes, even if I know a person really needs help with EQ, it might be safer off to say, here's a few IQ tips to start with. And let's take them one by one. How do you improve your IQ? As I said, generally the biggest mistake is not generating enough ideas. So we tend to work with people to stimulate their creativity, either through them. We can teach somebody a technique how to generate more ideas, or we just make sure there are more people in the room who have different ideas, and that it's a safe environment for them to share. It sounds so simple, but so often in teams, I'll walk in, there may be 10 people in the room, but only one person is generating ideas, either because there's a hierarchy, or they're scared of them, or the other people have just got used to not saying anything. And if you can suddenly unlock all the other 9 people, you've got 10 times the amount of ideas. That's going to instantly give you better strategy, even if some of the ideas are crazy. So in the IQ bucket, the things people can do is generate more ideas. There may be people sitting listening going, well, I work on my own. How can I generate more ideas on my own? Well, the great news is now with generative AI, you've got a thinking partner.
Wow. Yeah.
You can give them whatever topic you want to generate ideas on and say, generate 100 ideas on this topic. You know, you might say, what would be the plot line of a terrible movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger? Right? Give me 100 plots. Within 2 minutes, ChatGPT or Perplexity will have generated 100 plots, and suddenly you can pick from those. Whereas if you'd sat on your own, you might only come up with 2 or 3.
Yeah, yeah.
Generate more ideas is the initial key to improving your IQ in this matter.
Wow, yes. Good, thank you. Here's the third question I ask everybody in the podcast. What gives you purpose in your work, Faris? What's your motivation or why behind helping others succeed more holistically?
It's a great question, right? And I've had this discussions with several people close to me around what gives purpose, and I think there are 2 elements to purpose. One is, where do you direct it? You know, is your purpose driven by the environment, by humanity, by wealth, by education, but also what scale is your purpose on? You know, and the scale one has always been fascinating for me. I've always gravitated towards the micro scale. Help the individual, help more individuals, and then they will hopefully go on to help others around them. You know, I'm a big advocate of, if we could all make the space or the room we're in safe, then if everyone did that, then every room everywhere and the world would suddenly be a better place. Whereas some of my friends work on a macro scale. They say, well, no, we should change policies and governments and senior leaders. You know, let's solve famine, let's solve the refugee problem by working at a grand scale. Yeah. So very much for me, I work on the micro. You know, that's why I like working with more teams, you know, have more people that I get to interact with. I think that's what drew me into teaching, you know, rather than sitting on the board of a school, be in the classroom, help all those students improve. So that's very much what gives me purpose. Help as many people as possible on a one-on-one or in a you know, close proximity, so that they can then cascade that to others. For me, is where I get my purpose from.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. We are going to take a short break here for about 30 seconds, and we'll come back very soon. Hi, thanks for listening. I'm so glad you're here. If this conversation is resonating with you and you started to reflect on your own leadership, your purpose, or how to move forward with more confidence and clarity, then I would love to invite you to take the next step. You can download my free guide, Unlock the Overlooked Path to Fulfillment. Or if you're curious about coaching, you can book a 30-minute free call with me. No pressure, just a chance to talk about your story and explore what's possible. You find everything at lifeleadershipconnected.com, lifeleadershipconnected.com. I'd love to connect with you. Hello and welcome back to the Life and Leadership Connected podcast, and today I interview Faris Aranki. I will continue with the questions here. Faris, if someone feels strong in IQ but weak in EQ or FQ, where should they start?
Okay. Well, as I said, I love EQ. You know, EQ is the one for me that's closest to my heart. And the single best thing I tell people, if you want to improve your EQ, is actually shut up and listen more. Which sounds remarkably easy to do, but for some people is the hardest thing in the world, you know. I work with a lot of very strong leaders, and for them strength means talking a lot. I was once working with one of my clients, and we were running a workshop for the day. It was a 2-day workshop actually, and we got to the end of day 1 and I said to him, how do you think that went? And he said, I think that was brilliant. And he looked behind him and there was a whiteboard full of content, ideas. And he said, look, we've generated loads of great ideas. The team are all on board. And, you know, I think it's been a brilliant day and we're going to have a great day too. And I said, okay, can I tell you what I saw? And he said, yeah, sure. I said, you've got a full whiteboard, but they're all your ideas. And I saw a team that didn't say anything. And it was just you talking. And he said, no, that can't be the case. You must be wrong. I said, well, fortunately for you, we recorded the whole meeting because there were some people on the other side of the world and we'd recorded it for them. I said, let's look at the data. And the good thing with modern technology is you can pull data from it, right? So I just asked the summarizer to summarize how much everyone in the meeting had spoken. Yeah. And I said to him, so have a guess, how much do you think you spoke? What percentage of the meeting did you speak versus the rest of the team? And he said, well, there was 10 of us in the room. I maybe spoke 10 to 15%. But when we pulled the data, he spoke for over 70% of the meeting.
Wow.
But he couldn't believe it because you're not often monitoring your own. And then I said, okay, let's just take a random 5 minutes from the meeting. How many times do you think you said no to somebody in your team? And again, he said, oh, I don't know, maybe once in 5 minutes. We counted over 10 times in 5 minutes that he said no, or closed down somebody else's conversation. And I said, you're not creating the space for your team to actually, you're not showing enough EQ here, right? You are dominating and you don't even know it. Right. So with him, first of all, he had to accept that overnight, but we created two new rules. One was he couldn't say no. Every time he said no, he had to buy the team a drink or a donut or something.
Yeah.
And secondly, he was only ever allowed to speak last after everyone else in his team had said something.
Yeah.
And I said, for day 2, just follow those 2 rules and let's see how you get on. Very different day 2. The team felt more involved. We were getting much more engagement, and I knew they would do the things that were being put up on the whiteboard. And this, I said to him, is the difference in great EQ. Listening more, because you'll also learn more.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's, if anyone comes to me with EQ, I always check how much you're listening versus speaking.
Yeah, wow. I'm reminded of an assessment that I use and that you might have heard of, 5 Voices.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because I think that speaks about the same thing. You know, we are different categories of people, and so that's.
Yeah, it's a great technique. Anything that you can get people to think a bit differently, hear some different perspectives is brilliant.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And what would you say are a few habits or tools that you teach to improve focus and strategic clarity?
So, I mean, there's loads of great tools out there. Yeah. And actually, some people walk around with so many tools. I'm a massive fan of keeping it simple because 2 things. Every time you take on a new tool, it's a change program. Particularly if you're introducing it to a team, you have to, if you think it's very simple, we're just going to start using this new piece of software. No, you have to teach them how to use it, keep them engaged and excited to use it, and then help them as they struggle. So as a leader, you're suddenly taking on a whole new change program. Just to introduce the tool, so it better be worth it. Secondly, some people become obsessed by the tool, not actually the behavior. So think about how many people wear smartwatches and go, oh, I haven't done my 10,000 steps, and they become obsessed by the number, but not actually about healthy lifestyle. So yeah, I always keep tools simple, but ones that can observe, give you feedback. Just like I said, you know, if you want for your EQ, record stuff. Pull the data from it around how much you listen, how much you speak, what words you say a lot. Right? Very, very powerful. But you can get the same thing by asking others to give you feedback. You know, in focus, you know, I like to. You can use good old-fashioned sort of calendars and time management to have a look. But at the crux is, make sure you have on a page all the things you need to do. Look at it objectively and go, wow, is that a lot of stuff? Maybe I need to start doing less of that. That's really, FQ and focus is about prioritization. And too often we don't do an audit of all the things we're doing and start saying no to a few of them. You know, that's the biggest area you can make an improvement. And in terms of IQ, as I said, use the tools of generative AI. It can really help you. But just like I used to tell the kids, if you don't use this regularly enough, you know, because they'd all use calculators, and I said, no, sometimes we just should do old mental arithmetic. If you don't use this enough, it's going to get weaker. So just test yourself to generate more ideas on safe topics. You'll be amazed at how quickly your creativity, your critical thinking improves.
Yeah.
And that will be very useful in all aspects of your life.
Yeah. Great. And I wonder, you spoke about this, you know, how you train people who are, you know, weak in EQ, but do you have some more ways to do that? How can you train them practically or maybe for a person early in his career?
Yeah, I think early on in my career, one of the things that stood out for me, which I found very painful at the time, was an old boss who explained to me that different people like different communication styles. And fundamentally, there are 4 main communication styles, David. There is the logical style. You when you talk to somebody else, you use a lot of logic and fact. There is a direct style. You just tell the other person what you want from them. Yeah. There is a bridging style, which is it's all about the relationship between the two of you. And there is a visionary style, where it's all about storytelling and creating an amazing vision. And so my old boss used to explain this to me, and he said, the thing is, we all naturally use one style. And he said, you, Faris, your natural style is bridging. You will try and be everyone's friend. And he said, that's great until you meet someone who doesn't want you to be their friend. and then you're going to fall apart. And he was 100% right. I went into a room, a very senior room. I tried to be everyone's friend, and it didn't work. And so after that, he said, okay, what we need to do to help you is build up the other 3 skills, the communication styles. So from now on, for the next month, anytime I ask you to do a task, I need you to prepare it in the 4 styles. Okay? So if I ask you to write an email, I need 4 versions of the email, 1 in each style. If I ask you to prepare a presentation, 4 versions of the presentation. If it's a speech, 4 versions. So that suddenly meant 4 times the amount of work. And I hated him for it. But it was one of the best things ever because it taught me how to communicate in those different styles that I wasn't good at. It's like going to the gym and working on the machines you've never used before.
Wow.
By the end of that month, I could do it so much better. And I carried on. Which means now I can move between the styles. Right? And this is something I do with juniors early on in the career. It's easier to start learning these styles early on in your career than have to change in your 50s or 60s. You can, it's just going to require more effort. So introduce the concept and force them to communicate in a style they don't like. Just to build up that muscle, just like my old boss did with me. So I challenge people who are listening to this, have a go. Whatever the next message, having a conversation tonight with your loved ones, change how you have that conversation, see how it goes.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. And here's the 4th question I asked everybody in the podcast. How do you personally balance leadership and well-being? What success factors have helped you lead yourself well while staying healthy?
Yeah, it's very, very hard, isn't it? It's that kind of FQ aspect. And here's the thing that surprises a lot of people. Since I started my own business, I actually work less than when I was a partner in a consulting firm. And people don't believe that. But it's your own business. Surely you just keep working. And I said, well, yes and no. Right? First of all, I built a business around things I really enjoy. So some of it doesn't feel like work. But equally, I get to prioritize. When someone else is your boss, they are prioritizing on your behalf. Even when you're a partner. So when I was a partner in a firm, they were like, you have to attend this meeting, you have to be part of this committee, you have to, even if it wasn't stuff you were passionate about or you saw value in, you had to. And that's a lot of stuff. It adds up very quickly. But when you're your own boss, you literally apply the critical test. Will this help me achieve what I want to achieve? No, then why am I doing it? Get rid of it. So actually, I found it easier to be more ruthless and bring more balance to my life, but also being clear what my priorities are. Now, every year, I have 9 areas of my life that I list a goal in, and I prioritize them. And these cover the different aspects from business to health to family to finances to skills to travel. And each year, the priority list changes. One year it might be, hey, work is really important, but the next year it's family, or the next, and actually I do this every 6 months. And by having that clarity and having done that thought process, it really helps me prioritize and push back on particularly work when other things are more important. But people think it's crazy that, they have that kind of level of rigor to my life, but I find it massively helps me. And it's the same thing I do when doing strategy projects for clients. So, if you're not clear, how can you say no to stuff? How can you create those boundaries? It all starts with you being clear and actually making the decisions.
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Thank you. Ferris, can you share a transformation story? Someone who applied this formula that you developed and saw breakthrough?
Yeah. Well, fortunately for us, loads of our clients, or most of our clients, have a breakthrough. Not all of them. Let's be honest. It's one particular story that I'm going to share is about a team that we're working with, and we were brought in because their performance as a team had slipped over time. And this was partly linked to COVID. Now, going into COVID, they operated at one level, but then when COVID hit, their level went down. And we attributed some of it to them being stressed by COVID. But actually what became clear was it was being dislocated, no longer being in the same office with each other, was affecting their performance. Now, why was this the case? They were a team that were naturally competitive with each other because they worked in trading. So they were all told to go and make as much money as possible, and they saw each other as competitors for the bonuses, for the sort of the bragging in the office. Yeah. So it meant when they're in the office, they did a weird kind of teamwork, but it was teamwork. They kind of boast to each other. Oh, I've just made $100 million. Oh, I've just done this. I've just done this, which was sharing information, right? And it is a kind of teamwork. It's not the best way of teamwork, but it is a kind of teamwork. So that was it was kind of like papering over the cracks in the team. But what happened as soon as they were distant, they stopped boasting. They stopped sharing information because It's one thing to sit in an office and go, I'm the best, let everybody look at me. But if you're sat at home, you don't think, I'm going to ring someone just to tell them I'm the best. I'm not going to ring them to boast. And the thing about that boasting is people would go, well, hang on a minute, you've just done that. Have you not read that news report? That sounds like it's a really bad idea. So they would get information back. So because they stopped communicating with each other, they lost that sort of feedback loop, and their trading decisions got worse and worse and worse. So we were asked to help improve their performance. And the way we saw that they needed to was to start seeing each other as humans and start working as a team. But that wasn't going to happen just by saying, hey, you all need to work as a team, because they didn't value that. So when we started working with them, we put in place some new procedures to increase the frequency of their contact and how they communicated. But at the core of it was my mission to just get them to have more fun and see each other as friends. So I turned the start of every meeting into a game. So I said, in week 1, I said, all right, who wants to play a game? They all said yes. And I said, by the way, you can win real money in this game. And I said, oh, okay, now we're interested because I love winning money. I said, it's 100 euros per person, so you all have to transfer 100 euros to me, so they all did. And I said, the game is simple. There's 10 of us here. You have to guess how many children we all have, collectively. You have to write one number down, and whoever gets the number right wins all the money. So they all sat and thought, okay, well, there's 10. Most people have 2 children, or, I think, so each made a guess. Everyone revealed their numbers. I said, okay, the only way we find out is we go around the group and you tell us how many children you have. So let's start with person 1. Person 1, how many children do you have? You have 2? Okay, what are their names? What are their ages? Tell us a funny story about them. Tell us what their hobbies are. I spent 5 minutes going around each person learning about their children. Because the point for me of the game was not about how many children there were. It was learning about the children.
Yeah.
Yeah? And somebody won the money. Week 2, we did favourite holiday. Week 3, we did pets. Week 4, we did cooking skills. The whole point was to get them to know each other without realising they were getting to know each other. Wow. Within a month, they were started to just have natural conversation. How are your kids? How's the holiday that's coming up? How is your golf going? They'd start ringing each other. They'd start transferring little bits of information in those phone calls. Yeah. What happened at the same time? Their performance as a team improved.
Yeah.
They made 6% more profit than they've ever made. Yeah. At the end of 6 months, and that's like, for us, it's like, that's turned. Their boss said, "This is amazing. This is like a completely new team." I said, "It's not amazing, right? I've just done what you should have been doing. I've made them into a team, and that's what I need you to start looking at."
I'm thinking you used the carrot, so to speak, so they caught on with money, and then the really important thing was their conversations with each other.
Yeah, it's no different to when a child won't eat their broccoli and you do the airplane. Yeah. Here comes the airplane. Yeah, they're not seeing the real reason that you're doing the activity. Yeah. That will bring them much more value.
Thank you for that story.
That's okay.
What would you say is one small step someone can take this week to grow the effectiveness in all 3?
Yeah, I think in all 3 quotients, I'm going to steal from the EQ bucket, right? I tell everyone, if you listen more and ask one more question than you are comfortable with, in any situation, you will improve your IQ, your EQ, and your FQ. Because if you ask the right question, you'll get a new idea. If you ask a right question, you'll get the opinion of the other person, which is important for EQ. And if you ask the right question, you'll understand whether a task is worth doing or not. So asking more questions than you normally do, will instantly improve across each of those 3 dimensions.
Wow, good. Thank you so much, Faris. I wonder, what legacy do you hope to leave with your company Shiageto and your message?
I mean, the greatest legacy lives on through the people that we work with. 20 years ago, I was a school teacher. I'm no longer a school teacher. But do you know what the most beautiful thing happens infrequently, David? Some of the students I taught 20 years ago look me up on social media, particularly on LinkedIn, and they send me a message and they say something incredibly nice like, "Hi, you were my teacher. I don't know if you remember me, but I just wanted to thank you." When I get those messages, I instantly, I will reply and I will jump on a phone call with them. But that is, for me, is what legacy is. You live on through others, through the bits that you craft, and sometimes you will never know. You might never get that email, but you still impact. That's why I love operating at the micro level. Go forth, interact, impact on more people's lives, and then you're leaving a legacy through them. And that's super powerful.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Where can people find your work and learn more about your success formula if they want to get in contact with you and learn more, or invite you for coaching or consulting?
I hope they'd love to learn more. So I would recommend them. I'm going to direct them to two places. One, come and visit the company website. It's www.sheerghetto.com. We'll put the spelling in the notes. Or come and find me, Faris Orenki, on LinkedIn. I spend probably too much time there, but I do post every day little tips, share the experiences in my life, and I reply to every message that I ever receive there. So come and say hello, and we'll strike up a conversation.
Good, good. Do you have any final encouragement for someone who's gifted but struggling to get this traction in their leadership?
Yeah.
Some quote or something.
The absolute best news for you is all of this is learnable, right? You have 99% of the knowledge that you need to be successful. We can help you unlock it. That's the great news. So it's not about learning new stuff. It's just about adopting it and using it day to day.
Thank you. Thank you, Faris, for this conversation. I've enjoyed it really, and I think there's a lot of gold nuggets here that I think all of us listeners and viewers can, have value, see value in.
Thank you very much.
So, watchers and listeners of this podcast, thank you for being here today. And my name is David Dalian Cruz, and this is the Life and Leadership Connected podcast. And we used to say, we empower your journey. So thank you for listening, and welcome back when we release our next podcast. And until then, bye-bye.